everybody. I'm missing you today, and I hope you've had a good morning and wanted to try something new with you and see if we might be able to figure out a way to have class even when I'm not here. So thanks for your patience as we try this, and thank you to our substitute who's here today, who's going to help facilitate this with me. And so you've already clicked the play button. But before we get started, I wanted to remind you of a few critical things from yesterday, right? We are in the middle of a conversation about the Constitution, and yesterday we talked about Article 1 being the legislature, Article 2 being the executive, and Article 3 being the judicial. This is going to be critical for you to remember. So I would encourage you to think back to the stuff that you've already learned. You remember back in Great Britain that the British Parliament wanted more power. They wanted to get power away from the king and to themselves. So the way to remember that Article 1 is the legislature is our legislature in the creating of our Constitution was the same way. So again, legislature is going to be first because they don't want the president to have too much power. And you can help fix that by putting the legislature first. Second is then going to be the president. Supreme Court came in third because they really didn't altogether know how to deal with that, how the Supreme Court was going to ultimately function. It's actually the shortest part of the Constitution, and so we'll talk more about that when we get to the Supreme Court and how it is that the Supreme Court got more power over time. But for now, just a refresh from yesterday. Legislature first, Article 1, executive branch, Article 2, judicial branch, Article 3. All right? So if you were to give, let's talk, right? So here in a minute, you're going to press the pause button. So whomever is close to the television, get ready to press the pause button. If you were to change the Constitution to give either the executive branch, legislative branch, or the Supreme Court a power that they don't currently have, what power would you give to which branch that they don't currently have? Talk about that a minute, hit the pause button, and then have a conversation over a few minutes, and then come back to the video. Well, I hope that was interesting conversation for you. I look forward to hearing what you guys came up with on the powers that you think the government and which branch should have. But if you can go ahead and get to that first slide, it should say popular sovereignty, and there should be some arrows on it. You're going to see there some opportunities for a balance of power. So on the right side of the screen, there are three circles that form a triangle that all talk about the ways in which the checks and balances of the Constitution keeps the various branches of the government in check. And so this is a reminder. We talked about this on Monday when we were dealing with 9/11 Heroes Day, that popular sovereignty means the power rests with the people. That means the power rests with you. It does not rest in the government. It rests with the people. So the president, the legislature, the Supreme Court, all these people are employees of the people. We do not surrender ourselves to them. They are employees of the citizenry. And this, again, is why it's so critical that we register to vote and that we make our thoughts and feelings known about various issues to our elected leaders. They are your employees. So popular sovereignty means they are your employee and the political power rests in the people. And so that's tied to limited government. That triangle on the right side of your screen is designed to remind us that the legislative branch is checked by both the executive branch and the Supreme Court. The executive branch is checked by the Supreme Court and the legislature, and then the Supreme Court is checked by the legislature and the executive branch. So limited government means that nobody holds all the power and that we must subject ourselves to the Constitution. So generally speaking, your elected leaders are supposed to hold themselves to the rule of law. Now, that does not mean that they can write laws that exempt themselves. They actually technically can and probably should get voted out of office if they do that. But the rule of law means that all laws are to be followed by everybody, including your elected leaders. There is actually an exception for that, and I think we're going to deal with that in the executive branch, and that is individuals that serve on behalf of the United States in other countries, and those that are representatives from other countries to the United States, and they're serving in like the Russian oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank. You guys are going to be laughing at me over this one. The Russian embassy. So the ambassadors to various countries can actually have executive immunity. So if they did break the law, they would not go to jail for that. So that's an exception on the rule of law. Separation of powers means that the federal government has things that they can and cannot do in their respective branches. The president cannot rule on law. The president can only enforce it. And so the three branches are not entirely separated, but they do rely on each other and are required to do so. Now that you've had a little bit more exploration and you know that the Congress approves the Supreme Court nominations and the Congress approves bureaucratic nominations, that the legislative branch makes the law that the president can veto and the Supreme Court can overrule. You know that the judicial branch is nominated by the president and is confirmed by the Senate. You know that these things exist. Can we go back to the first question? Is there anything that you would change on that first question? Is there a power you would give to one of the branches of the government that they don't currently have that you think would be critical? And since I'm not there, I actually would love to hear the answer to this. So if you think about it, write it down either on the board or somewhere, and I'd like to see that when I come back later today from my appointment. But press the pause button, talk about that again if you would. Okay, welcome back. Let's talk real quick here about the basic outline, some basics related to the Constitution. Let's talk about veto. Congress makes laws, but the president can veto them. You see this a lot more whenever you have a legislature who is a majority, one party, and the president is a different party. But Congress can override a presidential veto by 2/3 majority. I would encourage you guys to look that up. When was the last time a presidential veto was overturned? I'm not going to tell you the answer. I want you to find it. Something else that the legislature can do is they can impeach a president. Now, the House of Representatives is in charge of drawing up charges against a president, and they can impeach the president in the House, but it's the Senate who actually has a hearing to determine what to do with the impeachment proceedings from the House of Representatives. So it takes both House and Senate to impeach a president, and it's up to the Senate then to determine whether or not it's worthy of removing them from office. Because if the Senate votes to impeach, the president is going to be removed from office. If the House votes to impeach, it goes to the Senate. The House cannot remove a president from office. Only the Senate can do that. So you have on your screen there three times when a president was impeached, actually four. Andrew Johnson in 1868, and we went a long time before the next one was impeached, and that was Bill Clinton. He was impeached for lying under oath, and since I'm not there, I'm going to spare you the details of that, but if your substitute is aware of that, you can press the pause button and share with the class the details related to lying under oath. And then Donald Trump in 2019 and 2021, he's still dealing with the political and legal fallout from January 6th and that commission. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in this election cycle with Donald Trump. I have some students who are enthusiastic Donald Trump fans. So if that's you, you probably are unhappy with what it is that's going on. I have some students, a few students, who are unenthused with Donald Trump and are thrilled with what's taking place. We're going to respect each other's positions there. A judicial review you have on your board is the power of a court to determine the constitutionality of action. Judicial review is a word you're going to need to know over and over and over again. Judicial review applies both to the legislature making laws and to the president's ability to make an executive order. So the Supreme Court can rule an executive order of the president, which has the full force of the law, without having to write a law, which is its own interesting conversation, right? The Supreme Court can declare both to be unconstitutional. So let's talk here again. Press the pause button and have a conversation. Should the president have the constitutional authority to make an executive order which has the full force of the law, and should he or she have that power? Press the pause button and let's talk. And then the last conversation that I want you to have with each other today is the relationship between the state and the national government. There are things that are reserved for the states. There are things that are reserved for the federal government. And is there a relationship there that you would change? If the state should have more power, what power do you think the state should have? If the state should have less power, what power do they have that you would say should be given to the federal government? Hit pause again and have that conversation. Do you think the federal government should give power to the states? If so, what power? Or do you believe the state should give power to the federal government? If so, what power? Take a minute or two and talk about that. But there are 4 ways in which amendments can take place. The first is with a 2/3 vote of the legislature, both houses, and ratified by 3/4 of the state legislation. Most of the time, that's how it happens. 2/3 votes of the legislature, 3/4 votes of the state legislature. That's how an amendment can happen to the Constitution. It also can be proposed by Congress and ratified by a convention. The 21st Amendment is an example of that, and that was to take away the 18th Amendment. It can be proposed by a national convention and 2/3 vote of Congress, or proposed by a national convention and ratified by conventions of 3/4 of the states. There actually already is in motion state legislatures who have voted to engage in a national convention with the hope of limiting the federal government's power. That has it's probably a far stretch for that to probably take place, but it is in motion, so we'll see if anything ever comes of that. And also interesting to note is that you'll probably be tested on this. A president cannot make a treaty. They can engage in a formal agreement or an informal agreement, but they cannot engage in a treaty without approval of Congress. So a president can enter into an understanding with another nation without Congress's approval, but the president cannot engage in a formal treaty with another nation without Congress's approval. So then lastly here you see on this last screen federalism, division of powers, expressed and implied powers. And this is one that expressed, implied, and inherent. This is one that is a hot topic in our world today. What power does the federal government have in the Constitution that's expressed? Should expressed being the Constitution enumerates or spells out that the various branches of the government have that power. So the executive branch has the power to veto laws. That's an expressed power. The legislature has the expressed power to impeach the president. That's an expressed power. But there are other things that are there that are implied powers. Things that are born out of the necessary and proper clause, things that the federal government might want to do but does not have the expressed power to do, and those are called implied powers. And the government can use implied powers, and it's the role of the Supreme Court to act on whether or not those implied powers are constitutional. So that is going to be an ongoing conversation that we have in our adult lives. What power does the government have? Is it expressed? Is it implied? And if it's implied, do they actually have that power to do that in office? So it becomes all the more important for the Supreme Court to act on implied powers in our day to day. So again, express powers, the Constitution expressly gives that branch of government the right to do something. Implied powers, it's implied that they have that power, but it doesn't expressly say it. So an implied power might be the president creating bureaucracy after bureaucracy after bureaucracy, and Department of the Interior, Department of Homeland Security, all of the departments that the president oversees. That's an implied power, and the president can keep adding to those as he or she feels fit. And but the question is there a constitutional limitation to those bureaucracies? So you have some expressed powers: raise an army. The implied power is that you got to raise money for an army. An expressed power is to collect taxes. Well, how are you going to do that? Well, we're going to create the IRS. Is the IRS necessary? Or can you collect taxes in other ways? And then regulate commerce is an expressed power. Well, does that mean we let anything in the United States, including things that are currently illegal? Or does the federal government have a responsibility to prohibit the importation and exportation of certain goods? So that's a conversation that you could have as you wrap up today. What expressed powers does the government have? What implied powers do they exercise that might not be constitutional? Well, I hope you're having a great day together, and I hope you've had some meaningful conversations. Sorry I couldn't be with you today, but I look forward to seeing how it went tomorrow. You guys matter, and I hope the rest of your day goes